Chapter 6 4 Years Prior. The lightning bugs flitted against the jar in John Tyler's small hands. I'd made all the holes in my jar too big, and the glowing critters had crawled out. He held the jar in front of his snaggletooth with a big smile. This was the first time he was old enough to come out with the rest of us. Mrs. Johnson was wrapped in a blanket, watching him like a hawk from the front porch. The chilly night air created prickles along my long, skinny legs. It was always cooler after a storm, especially as bad as the one we'd had. Broken twigs littered Katie's front yard, and Rusty said he'd found the flag from someone's mailbox in his yard. Rusty'd come over when he'd seen us climb out of the cellar. There wasn't a tornado warning this time, but Daddy always ushered us over to the Johnson cellar whenever the sky was tainted green. Rusty was on a higher branch than Katie, determined not to be outdone. Miss Johnson had already called Katie down twice, but she showed no sign of giving in. Katie didn't like to lose any more than I did. "Katie Marie Johnson, you get out of that tree, or so help me, I will take a hickory switch to your legs," Mrs. Johnson yelled, leaning over the porch railing. "I swanny to my goodness, that girl is going to be the death of me," she complained, plopping back in the rocker next to Mama. Katie's face was as red as a beet when she finally dropped to the ground. "You win!" she yelled up the tree. "I should have known better than to have a climbing contest with a monkey anyway." Rusty was down the tree in a flash, chasing Katie clear across the field. She had liked him since last summer, but she'd die before admitting it. I'd only found out because I'd caught her scribbling his name in the back of her notebook. "Oh no, John Tyler, don't let them out," I said, reaching for the open jar in his small hand, but it was too late. The little black legs had already scurried to the rim of the jar and taking flight before I could get it. "Back! Back!" he cried, grabbing the air. "They're too high," I said, jumping up to catch the last one in sight. "Here you go, JT." It was the high school boy, Thomas. He opened his fist and dropped 2 new bugs into John Tyler's jar. John Tyler quickly twisted on the lid. "Now don't take the lid off again or they'll fly away," Thomas warned, to a very serious-faced John Tyler. "Why?" John Tyler asked, his sticky hands leaving chocolate smudges where he gripped the glass. "Because they don't like to be locked up," Thomas said, stooping down to John Tyler's level. "If you had wings, wouldn't you want to fly?" John Tyler studied over the question, tapping on the glass until the bug crawling up the side hit the bottom. "Yep, but I want to keep 'em. I'll let 'em go before bedtime." "That sounds like a good plan," Thomas smiled, rustling John Tyler's hair. John Tyler left the jar on the bottom step and darted off through the yard, flapping his arms like he was flying. I suddenly felt childish and hid my own jar down by my side. "You see Rusty?" Thomas asked, glancing my way and causing my heart to beat a little faster. I said, peering on my tiptoes across the field. "He was chasing after Katie a little while ago." "Which way did they go?" he asked, following my line of sight to the stalks that rolled like ocean waves from the gusty wind. "Just through the cornfield. Do you want me to help you find them?" He looked up at the porch where I knew Daddy was watching. "You need something, son?" Daddy asked, coming down the front steps, the soft glow of his cigarette lighting the way. "Just looking for Rusty, sir." "Daddy, this is Thomas Baldwin," the boy cut me off. "I'm staying with the Tyners." "Marshall Parker." Daddy stuck out his hand, the glow of the cigarette bobbing as it dangled from his lips. "Nice to meet you, Thomas." "Is it okay if I help him find Rusty?" I usually didn't have to ask permission to go with my friends, as long as we stayed on our land, but the way Daddy was sizing Thomas up, it felt like the right thing to do. Daddy rubbed his chin and glanced back at Mama, using their special silent language. I never saw Mama move a muscle, but Daddy must have seen something I didn't, because he sighed, shook his head, and said, "I suppose so. Just don't be gone too long. It's getting late." Luckily, Thomas had his hands jammed in his pockets, staring at his feet, and didn't see Daddy's reluctance to let me go with him. For the first time, I noticed Thomas was nearly as tall as Daddy. Thomas followed as I started away from the house, but I didn't dare turn back until we were out of sight from watchful eyes. The cornstalks provided a haven from the 8 looking after us from the porch. I glanced back at Thomas and tried to see what had made Daddy act so strangely before. He usually got along with my friends. Besides being tall, Thomas wasn't that much different than the other boys around here, conceited, still a bit gangly with dirt under his nails. although his ever-changing eye color was a different shade of green than I'd ever seen on a boy, like new grass in the spring, and the few times I'd been close to him he smelled fresh, like he'd just taken a bath. That was definitely something new, but nothing to fret over. Thomas smiled crookedly when he caught me staring. Heat rose from my chest, and I quickly looked away. Okay, maybe that was new. "Don't your feet hurt?" he asked, frowning at my bare feet. I glanced down at my dirty feet, the pink polish chipping in places. I never wore shoes in the summer, unless I was doing chores. "Not much," I shrugged. "I got cut once. Stepped on a broken bottle," he said. "If you'd ever picked glass out of your foot with a sewing needle, you'd put on a pair of shoes." "Yeah, we don't run into too many glass bottles out here in the fields, just corn husks mostly." "Where were you when it happened?" I asked, sneaking a peek at him from beneath my lashes. "The glass, I mean." "Just the neighborhood around my house," he said, to keep pace with me. His legs were a good bit longer than mine, but he didn't seem to be in any great rush to find Rusty. I wasn't either. "Idiots always threw garbage out into the street," he said, his voice taking on a slight edge as he snapped one of the stalks by his side. "I wouldn't let my daddy see you do that." He looked absently at his hand as if he were surprised to find the broken stalk there. "Oh, sorry about that. I wasn't paying attention." "Don't worry about it," I said, feeling foolish for scolding him. I stretched onto my tiptoes and peered over the stalks for Katie and Rusty. "I know they came this way." "I'm not in a hurry," he said absently. "It sounded like your daddy was, though." "Sorry about that. He usually isn't so uptight." "I'm used to it," he shrugged. "Kinda goes with the whole foster kid thing." "I don't think that's it," I said, wondering why he'd come to that conclusion so quickly. "He likes Rusty just fine. You're just new is all." I frowned. I didn't want him to get the wrong idea about my family. Daddy, like Mr. Johnson, got along really well with all the kids around here. Daddy hadn't had the easiest childhood himself. "It's cool," he said, giving my ponytail a playful tug. "You're probably right." He took off the straw-colored cowboy hat he was wearing and ran his fingers through his short brown hair. "I needed to get out of that house," he sighed before putting the hat back on. "You don't like the Tyners?" I asked, surprised. Rusty had never said a bad word about them. Of course, Rusty didn't talk about anything but mud bogging and frog gigging. "You know much about 'em?" Thomas questioned with a sideways glance. "They seem nice enough. I've seen Mr. Tyner checking the mail, and he always smiles and says hello." "You know Breland. Can I call you Bree?" he asked. Breland's kind of a mouthful. I shrugged indifferently, even though my stomach fluttered a little when he said it. A smile doesn't make someone a nice person. Before I had a chance to ask what he meant, he stuck out his arm, keeping me from stepping on Rusty and Katie, who were horizontal between two rows of corn. My mouth dropped open as they scrambled to get upright. They'd definitely gotten over their argument. "Sorry, guys," Thomas smirked, trying and failing to hold back a laugh. Katie shoved Rusty and tried to play it off, but I'd already seen them kissing. Rusty had a smug grin on his face, and Katie looked like she wanted to burrow into the ground and die. I pulled a piece of corn silk from her hair while she dusted the back of her shorts. I didn't know what to say. This was the last thing I expected to find. "If you tell anyone," she started, her cheeks flushed as she combed through her blonde hair with her fingers. "I didn't see anything," Thomas said innocently, holding his hands in the air. "I'm trying to forget," I grumbled, stepping away from them. I wondered if it was the first time they'd kissed. Katie and I told each other everything, but I didn't even know she knew how to kiss like that. From the looks of it, she'd had a lot of practice. "He attacked me," she said quickly, as if the idea just came to her. "Oh, I did not," Rusty said, rolling his eyes. "Yes, you did," Katie said dramatically, her finger wagging in his face. "And if you tell anyone about this, that is just what I'll say. The police will lock you up, Rusty Tyner. Do you want to go to jail?" "Grow up, Katie," Rusty brushed her off. "Or I'll tell Breland." "You shut your big fat mouth right now, Rusty Tyner, or I will make sure your bloodline ends with you." Katie charged at him, balling her fists. "Slow down, you two," Thomas said, still laughing as he stepped in to block Katie's path. Katie finally gave in and stalked back to her house, while Thomas pulled Rusty over to the side. "We're on our own tonight," he said in a hushed voice just loud enough for me to hear. "What do you usually do on nights like this?" Rusty's eyes grew wide and he shook his head, gesturing toward me. "I can take off," I offered, taking a step in the other direction. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about," Thomas said, shaking his head for me to stay. "It happened at my last place, too. Do you have a stash somewhere, or what?" Rusty looked at me grudgingly, like he wished I'd turn into a scarecrow. "There's peanut butter crackers and a couple of cans of tuna fish in the top cabinet over the washer and dryer. It's behind the bleach." "Wait a minute." I stepped forward, the realization of what they were talking about dawning on me. "You guys don't have anything to eat? Where are the Tyners?" Rusty's face reddened as he clenched his fists. "See what I mean?" he snapped. "Now she'll go run her mouth and I'll be sent away. I know the Tyners aren't saints, but I like it here." "Bree's not going to say anything," Thomas said, putting his hand on Rusty's shoulder to calm him before turning back to me. The green in his eyes caught a glimmer of moonlight as he looked to me for confirmation. "We can trust her." In the moment his eyes met mine, I knew he was right. I'd never tell a soul. Their secret was now my secret. No one had ever trusted me with anything like this before. I didn't think I knew anyone who had secrets like these. It felt wrong not to tell. It was wrong. Sure, Thomas was 17, but the Tyners were supposed to be his parents. My parents would have never left me with nothing to eat. Rusty was about to come out of his skin. I'd seen him mad like this once at school. He'd turned his desk over and been sent to the principal because someone had stolen the pencil from his book bag. "How far is the nearest store?" Thomas asked, not as bothered by the vein protruding in Rusty's forehead as I was. "About 5 miles," I said. "And that's just a gas station. The nearest grocery store is 20 miles toward town." We only went to the grocery store a couple of times a month. I'd been watching Mama carefully the last few times. Daddy said I could go in by myself after the baby came. Thomas pulled a roll of bills out of the side of his shoe, and I thought Rusty's eyes were going to pop out of his head. "What'd you do, rob a bank?" Rusty gasped. Thomas smirked and lightly smacked him in the back of the head. "No, you dope. I had a job at my last place. I stocked shelves at a furniture warehouse. I hated to give it up. It paid pretty good." "I can see that," Rusty said, the lack of food at his house clearly forgotten. Thomas kicked at the dirt. "Guess there's no chance of finding work around here in the sticks." "We'll just have to make this last," he said, counting the money. "There's still several hundred. I just need enough to get through the next school year." Satisfied that it was all there, he rolled the bills and stuck them back into his shoe. "Just 2 more years and that diploma will be in my hand. That's the only reason I haven't taken off for good." "Can't you just quit?" I asked. "I was sure Daddy did that in the 10th grade. Or maybe it was the 11th. "I didn't go this long not to get that piece of paper," he said smugly. "Without it, I'd probably just end up like the Tyners." Rusty looked at Thomas like he wanted to rip him to shreds when he spoke of the Tyners. Thomas either didn't notice or didn't care. I decided on the latter. In the short time I'd spent with Thomas, he didn't seem like the type to whitewash anything. I liked that. "I'm going to walk to the gas station," Thomas said. "Won't do any good," Rusty said, staring at Thomas's shoes. "They closed at 6 o'clock. "You're kidding me," Thomas choked. "What is this, Mayberry?" "Nope," Rusty said matter-of-factly. "They didn't have foster kids in Mayberry." They were bickering now, reminding me of Katie and her brothers. "Breland?" Daddy's voice moved with the wind over the swaying stalks. "I better get back," I said quickly, noting an edge of irritation in Daddy's voice. Katie must have gone straight back, leaving him to wonder where I was. The boys didn't look up as I left them behind, making a beeline for the porch. Daddy was already helping Mama down the steps. His eyes narrowed as I came through the clearing. He helped my very pregnant Mama into the truck, and I leaped up on the tailgate and waved to Katie. She didn't wave back, and I wondered if she was mad at me or just embarrassed. I'd have sure been embarrassed to have been kissing Rusty. Yuck. It took all of 2 minutes to get home. When the truck stopped, I hopped down and started for the house. I could hear Daddy and Mama talking, arguing really, which was an odd thing at my house. "Breland?" Daddy said as soon as he stepped through the door. I was already sprawled out on the couch thumbing through a teen magazine. Katie had bought me a subscription for my birthday last year. We like to take the relationship quizzes and fantasize about our future husbands. "What is it, Daddy?" Mama turned back from the kitchen and shot him a look. "Did y'all find Rusty all right?" he continued. By the tight set of his eyes, I had a feeling that was not what he'd intended to ask. "Yep," I said cheerily, wiggling a piece of gum from my pocket and popping it into my mouth. "Katie looked upset when she came back," he hedged. "What were she and Rusty doing when you found them?" Mama had her hands on her hips, shaking her head, but Daddy was careful to keep his eyes away from the kitchen. "You know Katie," I started. "With all those brothers, I don't think she knows how to talk to a boy without arguing." I was going to walk back with her, but she ran off and left me. It wasn't a complete lie. She had been arguing before she'd gone home. Still, a knot formed in my stomach at the half-truth. His shoulders relaxed a little, and he nodded, seeming nullified for the moment. "Just be careful of those boys," he said, before trudging